Friday of the 7th week of Easter.
A reading from the Acts of the Apostles. King Agrippa and Bernice arrived in Caesarea on a visit to Festus. Since they spent several days there, Festus referred Paul's case to the king, saying, "There is a man here left in custody by Felix. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him and demanded his condemnation. I answered them that it was not Roman practice to hand over an accused person before he has faced his accusers, and had the opportunity to defend himself against their charge. So when they came together here, I made no delay. The next day I took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought in. His accusers stood around him, but did not charge him with any of the crimes I suspected. Instead, they had some issues with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, but who Paul claimed was alive. Since I was at a loss how to investigate this controversy, I asked if he were willing to go to Jerusalem and there stand trial on these charges. And when Paul appealed that he be held in custody for the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar." The word of the Lord.
The responsorial psalm, the response is, "The Lord has established his throne in heaven. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all my being, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. The Lord has established his throne in heaven. For as the heavens are high above the earth, so surpassing is his kindness towards those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he put our transgressions from us. The Lord has established his throne in heaven." The Lord has established his throne in heaven, and his kingdom rules over all. Bless the Lord, all you his angels, you mighty in strength, who do his bidding. The Lord has established his throne in heaven.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. After Jesus had revealed himself to his disciples and eaten breakfast with them, he said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon Peter answered him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." He then said to Simon Peter a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Simon Peter answered him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was distressed that he had said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Amen, amen, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to dress yourself and go where you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." He said this, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had said this, he said to him, "Follow me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Friday of the 7th week of Easter. The first reading comes from Acts of the Apostles, chapter 25, verse 13b to 21. In this passage we hear Festus, the governor of Palestine, explain to King Agrippa and Bernice, who were descendants of Herod, about Paul. Now Paul had been arrested under the governorship of Felix, and Felix we know was a corrupt governor. He held him for 2 years expecting a bribe, something he didn't receive. Felix, even if he was corrupt though, couldn't hand him over to the power of the Jewish leaders because Paul was a Roman citizen, and therefore Paul had the rights to be able to have a full trial. When Festus came in, he tried to bring him to a tribunal. He wanted to take him up to Jerusalem to face the charges, but Paul was no fool. He realized that the road from Caesarea, which was on the seashore, up to Jerusalem was a very dangerous road, and he certainly would be assassinated on that road. In fact, he had been brought down from Jerusalem to Caesarea because there was a plot to assassinate him. So he appeals to Caesar. Once he appeals to Caesar, there's nothing the governor can do. Now it's odd that this know-nothing man from a know-nothing town, Tarsus in Asia Minor, would be able to appeal to Caesar. But in fact, every Roman citizen had the right to appeal to Caesar. So Festus had to keep him under arrest until there was a ship going out that could take him to Rome, where he would stand charges. It's interesting that Festus has to tell this whole story, but this is typical of the Acts of the Apostles. They tell the story as it happens, and then they have another character recount the story, sometimes with slightly different details, but it simply adds to the power of the story, that we hear it twice so that we don't miss any of the story. This was an ancient technique. In fact, we hear about the conversion of Paul 3 times in Acts of the Apostles. The Gospel is from John 21, 15 to 19. This occurs after the resurrection, after the disciples have caught 153 fish. Jesus served breakfast to the disciples of fish and bread, but this time the fish was emphasized and not the bread, because Jesus was calling the disciples to be fishers of men. He speaks to Simon Peter, says, "Do you love me more than these?" In fact, he asked them 3 times, "Do you love me?" Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Peter is given the opportunity to profess his faith 3 times, profess his love. God always gives us an opportunity to heal our mistakes. But also, Peter is being called to be the chief shepherd. In the Gospel of John, Jesus was the good shepherd. Peter is now taking over that responsibility. But Peter has to be reminded he's a sinner like the rest of us. He should keep his feet on the ground. It kind of reminds me of the old coronation rite of the Pope, when a Capuchin Franciscan would follow the Pope around, and 3 times during the ceremony, he would light a clump of flax, the material from which one makes linen. It was very dry, it would go up like flash powder, and he'd whisper into the ear of the Pope, "Sic transit gloria mundi," so passes the glory of the world. Or in modern English, "Don't get uppity, buddy, you're going to die. Keep your feet on the ground." In fact, this was the same ceremony that was performed by a slave when a Roman general would celebrate a triumph in Rome. 3 times reminded that he was human. Well, Jesus reminds Peter of that 3 times, but he also calls him to be the shepherd of the sheep. What's also interesting that there are 3 words in Greek for love: eros, which means physical love, phileo, which means friendship, and agape, which means total giving. Jesus says to Peter the first time, "Do you agape me? Do you give yourselves totally to me?" And Peter responds, "I phileo you, you're my buddy." Jesus asks the second time, "Do you agape me?" Peter responds the second time, "I phileo you." 3rd time Jesus says, "Do you phileo me?" Peter responds, "I phileo you." Peter's not the beloved disciple. He doesn't have it in him. Jesus takes him where he's at. He doesn't expect more of us than we can give. We shouldn't measure ourselves against others because we don't know what gifts they've received or not. We only know the gifts that God has given us. We should use those gifts to the fullest. Then at the end of the passage, we hear Jesus predict that Peter would follow him with a death that would glorify God. Just as Jesus has predicted his own passion, he predicts the passion of Peter, that the suffering of Peter on the cross should not be seen as a punishment, but rather as something that fulfilled the will of God, that as the Master, so the disciples. Now it's very interesting, this gospel is written around 90 AD. Peter is long since dead. So this gospel is not just speaking about the person of Peter, it's also speaking about the function of Peter, the Petrine office, what we today would call the papacy. And may God bless us.